Once, sorry, Larry. Then we now start recording. Okay.
Okay.
好了，我们 OK 开始吧。
Yep, we can start now.
All right. Imagine yourself in the center of a large Chinese city where thousands of people are being gathered for the grand unveiling of Picasso's last great sculpture. Thousands of people are gathered. There are court reporters on the steps of the court. There are several art classes around. The television cameras are moving. Reporters are going. Artists are going. Everyone is there for this major artistic event. Soon the statue over the last weeks has been filled with a huge shroud, so no one can see it until today. And the speeches begin. All of the fathers of the city, all of the mothers of the city begin to address everyone, thanking them for all of their physical, mental, financial contributions to making this wonderful event possible for us. And after all the speeches are over, a hush falls on the crowd, and we begin to hear behind the shroud waters, fountains of waters. And suddenly the shroud drops, and it's a moment of absolute awe. This magnificent piece of art is here for us to see, to enjoy, and to make our own. Well, what we see, of course, depends on where we stand. Some people at one end of the square see the statue from one angle. Other people see it from another angle. Artists see it from a very special angle to make it work. What we see also depends on who we are and why we're there, what our personal interests are. The court reporters are sketching it. The television cameras are reporting it. The art students are involved in a contest to see who can do the best drawing of it. Some people are just there to write letters home to mom, to tell mom what this special experience was like. And as the sun passes its zenith, all of the shadows on the statue change, and it changes the sense of the statue. I think you can see the metaphor that perspective is everything. That who we are, what our purposes are, what our purposes of communication are, these determine what it is that we see and how we move forward with it. The metaphor, of course, has to do with the human mind. The human mind is the most complex phenomena in the known universe. We now know that the human mind has been evolving for several million years through many different species until it is what it is today, unknown and unknowable. And so our psychological theories need to be able to reflect what our understanding of the human mind is. But all psychological theories, like all scientific theories, are necessarily limited. When Sigmund Freud started off in the 19th century, his theories were limited by the scientific model that was prevailing in the 19th century, and his ideas about the mind, and that the mind contained certain truths, certain structures. That was a part of the way 19th century scientists thought. And he wrote and thought for about 40 years, but during those 40 years, his ideas changed radically. And then those who have followed all the way up until present, we've had a cascade of psychological theories. And as you've each one gone through your own psychological training, you've been exposed to a number of different theories. And some of them make sense to you, Some of them don't make sense to you, but some of them have a special appeal. And so when we're trying to decide what sort of a psychologist we're going to be, we try to select a theory or a way of working that fits us. Because after all, psychotherapy is a relationship, and we have to be working with a theory that feels right to us. And so the next 22 sessions are going to be 10 lectures and 10 supervisions and 2 other question and answer sessions. And what we're going to be thinking here is how we can approach these various theories from a relational standpoint. Now, let me clarify. I'm not going to be offering you a new theory or a new way of working, but I'm rather going to be saying no matter what theory you've chosen, however you're working, that fits your personality and your understanding of yourself and of people, whatever that is, what I'm hoping these 22 weeks will do for each one of us is to add a dimension to what you're already doing. So that whether you're a Freudian, a Jungian, or whether you work with EFT or DBT, CBT, whatever your chosen specialty is, the relationship is always key. A few years ago, the American Psychological Association set up a task force to study all of the studies of psychotherapy for the last 100 years and to discover what it was that was important about psychotherapy, what made people change, what helped people. And so many different possibilities came up, but one thing came up again and again and again, the relationship. That it was the relationship between the therapist and the patient that made the difference. So many years later, people would report, well, you know, I had a nice therapist and I know I did some good therapy. I don't remember what I was working on. I don't remember much about it, but I do remember one day we were sitting there and suddenly she said, la, 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 and I nearly fell through the floor. She knew me. She got to me. We related and I changed. And so, however you work, I'm hoping that these 22 sessions help you add a dimension to what you're already doing. And that dimension is going to be a dimension, we're going to call it relatedness. But back just a bit on theory. Freud's own theorizing followed the 20th century, 19th and 20th century idea of science, which we now call modern. And the modern point of view, what we call it modern, the modern point of view is the view that started actually in the 16th century with the idea that if we just study the world and life and ourselves enough, we'll someday know the truth of everything. The idea that the universe is a giant clockwork set in motion by the hand of God, and it's our duty to study forever until we understand the workings of this clock. So truth has been something that people have been pursuing for centuries, but particularly in the last 3 or 4 centuries through the models of science that evolved from the 16th, 17th, 18th, and 19th century. So Freud followed those models in his formation of ideas about the mind. And so when we go back and we read early psychoanalytic theory, you realize that Freud was on a search for truth. What is the truth of the human mind? And so you know full well his early ideas, the way he broke the mind down, conscious, pre-conscious, unconscious, and then later id, ego, and superego. And there are many other ways that he and all of the psychoanalysts have sought to talk about, to discover the truth of the human mind. But at this point in time, after Einstein, we've begun to realize that the modern view that we're someday going to find the truth no longer holds. Scientists no longer believe that there are knowable truths, that the universe is so complex and so expanding that truth will never be clear to us. And this is especially true of the human mind. The human mind is complex, ever expanding. And so the postmodern perspective is that we're going to begin forming perspectives or models of things that we find interesting about the human mind. And we're going to develop those, and we're going to be aware that our perspectives are constantly changing. And our theories, as you know, it used to be that the theory had to be consistent and true, but we now know through chemistry, physics, biology, that in the postmodern view, there are many different theories that are contradictory and yet supported by data. And the classic example, as you know, is the wave versus the particle theory of light. That is, some experiments support the truth that light is a particles. Others say, no, light is a wave. And there are contradictions. So is light a particle or a wave? Both seem to be true. And so in the postmodern perspective, we run into all kinds of contradictions. And so what we're again trying to do is to set up perspectives, vantage points that give us something about what we're interested in. And so current science can be thought of more as less as a discovery of truth and more as a creation of ideas and thoughts that help us move forward in our lives. There's an interesting book that I think portrayed this. It's been around a while. It's called The Crack in the Cosmic Egg. And in this particular book, the idea is that human beings are living in an endless forest, and we're carving out a clearing just bit by bit of things that we find to be real, but there's forever more to be found. So we might think then of a scientific theory as one that is logical and internally consistent, but we no longer need to think of it as true, because scientific theory is an abstraction. It's a set of ideas, it's a set of assumptions, it's a set of postulates, and the real world and real people are not abstractions. And so we develop our theories now as a framework for limiting, collecting, and organizing our data. And we don't have to think of our theories as true or correct, but as helpful. And sometimes we see a contradictory event and we think, oh, well, maybe the theory is false, but we don't have to think that. The universe and the human mind are full of contradictions. So summarizing then, a theory which tends to be the most useful to us is the one which makes the fewest number of assumptions. That is a theory about the mind that assumes the least. It provides the simplest, the most parsimonious explanations. A theory that works for us best is successful at making predictions. This is what we're likely to see. A theory that is useful is also refutable. That is, we can figure out all the ways in which it is wrong. And a theory has heuristic value. Heuristic meaning the capacity to generate other ideas, other theories, and that it sets up more problems for the observer. Now, how does a scientific theory fail? First of all, it fails because of its prestige. So, for example, the Freudian theory of psychoanalysis is 150 years old. It's got a lot of prestige, and so it must be true. How mistaken is that? Now, we can see that it has endured for 150 years, and so it may well have some important things for us to learn, But if we assume that this theory, because it's lasted so long or has so much prestige, that that's what makes the theory work, then we're mistaken. A theory fails if it is logical and continuous, because life and the universe and the mind are not logical and they're not continuous. A theory fails when it limits to guide our perception. That is, if we're thinking a certain thing must be there, then we're going to find it. And you all have seen that so much in psychological theories. That is, our psychological theories are rich. They've been developed by very bright, compassionate people. And so in a certain way, each one of the great psychological theories has its own convincing value. And yet the fact that we then believe this theory, this can cause us to go astray, because it will guide us with our patients into thinking certain things are there, when what we need to be listening to is not the theory, but to our patients. And we need to be listening to the relationship that our patients are forming with us. And the other thing about psychological theories is they tend to destroy the very thing that we're observing. So if we have an idea about something and then we interact with somebody, then we either confirm it or we lose the possibility of observing what their particular truth might be. So a theory could cause us to see something, but the worst part about a theory is uncritical extension to other things. We find a theory that works one place, and then we think, aha. And so we try out another place and another place and another place. And we realize that uncritical extension of our theory gets in our way. Every human being that walks into my office and that walks into your office is absolutely unique. And there are no theories under God's sun that are going to explain that person. That person must explain herself to us. She must show us who she is, what's important to her, what she needs in life. So it's important that we not place too much value in theories. So with these thoughts in mind, and we're seeking to grasp what Freud originally was looking for, and where other eyes have gone, we can now begin to think about where we are with the human mind. And I told you that it's the most complex phenomena in the known universe. There's nothing anywhere that we know about that is more complex than the human mind. And so we now see the impossibility of the modern approach of searching for what is the truth of the human mind? What is the truth of your mind? What is the truth of my mind? Please, our truths have changed in the last 10 minutes, haven't they? Okay. So the human mind continues to change. So our contemporary studies then must shift to what's called the postmodern approach that privileges the construction of various perspectives for learning about aspects of our minds that interest us. And so as psychotherapists, what interests us is the question that guides our search for theory. In psychotherapy, we seek to alter minds. We approach this task with fear because in dabbling with an infinity of possibilities, we can hardly know which way to turn, what perspectives we can construct that will help us learn about what we'd most like to learn about. Where do we start, we ask ourselves. What exactly would we like to know about this client and about ourselves? And why would we like to know those things? Those are the questions that guide us, because we know that each client is unique. We know that each one of us is unique. And we know especially that the relationship that we're going to develop is very special, and it's co-constructed by two human beings relating to one another. So we begin with the assumption that human beings are born genetically endowed with a complex brain and complex central nervous system. And we further then assume that the brain and the nervous system grows and expands with time and becomes more complex. We also assume that earlier developments provide basic templates and guides for later developments. And a final assumption would be that many trajectories, paths of human mental development might be defined for study, but none are of greater interest to human life than relationship possibilities are, and the possibilities to expand the complexity and our consciousness over time. And so these 22 lectures and supervisions are going to be dedicated to looking at relationship possibilities and how an infant from conception is looking for the inner uterine wall. The inner uterine wall is what the child needs in order to survive. And then throughout the 9 months of the pregnancy, the child begins to learn a variety of things. We're now aware in the 3rd trimester, children are especially acoustically a series of international studies using microphones inside women's wombs have demonstrated how much it is possible for babies to hear what's going outside. And so now we know that our young people that are having babies now, they're every night getting together, sitting down quietly, reading stories to their unborn baby, talking to the baby. And now, since we usually know the sex of the baby, we're giving the baby a name, and we're beginning to relate long before the baby is born. And that's because young people have been taught that this baby needs connection to father, to brother, to sister, to the barking of the family dog. Okay, all of these things are audible to an unborn child. And then we know in what infant researchers are now calling the 4th trimester, which is, as you can tell, a mistake. Tri means 3. So if we have a 4th trimester, it's the 3 or 4 months immediately following birth. But the reason they're calling it the 4th trimester is because essentially the child's mind is continuing to develop much in the same way that it did in utero. And yet, as the child wakes up, the child's eyes and fingers and hands begin to move. And so slowly the child is awakening to the world around it. So we're going to be looking at those earliest relational possibilities. And then we're going to be looking about how those earliest, simpler relational possibilities merge into later, more complex ones, into more complex ones, and into more complex ones, until by the age of 4, 5, 6, or 7, we have a very well-formed human being who is able to think, tell stories, use symbols, and have relationships. And so what we're going to be looking at again and again is what's going on in that sequence of expanding relational possibilities through that time. And then we're going to also look at how in that period of expanding possibilities, where we're more and more complex, what sort of interruptions can stop or block some of those expanding possibilities. And we'll note trauma and fear, but we'll look at the conditions under which normal expansion of relational possibilities occur. And then that, of course, leads us to the psychotherapy question some years later. How can those blocks that were set up in earliest childhood to limit the way a person relates intimately, emotionally, how can those blocks be worked with in psychotherapy? That is, how can the relational expansion continue? Repeat, What we're going to be looking for and thinking about in this array of relational possibilities is the relationships are simple, more complex, more complex, more complex until we have a fully formed human being at age 5 or 6, okay? And in that, we're going to look at all the different ways in which that expansion of possibilities can be stopped, blocked, arrested. And then the question is, later, when these people with arrested development come into your office, how can you begin to extend yourself relationally to be present and to help the person move past those relational blocks? Now, you can see the way I'm talking that which psychological theory you're using doesn't really matter, so long as you're letting yourself be fully relational. And some theories promote the relationship. Other theories acknowledge that it's there, but don't necessarily promote it. But as psychotherapists, we know that the relationship is always central to what's happening, no matter how we choose to work. Okay, let's see if I can do this. Let's see if I can get this out here. My first book was in 1983, called Listening Perspectives in Psychotherapy. This is the cover of its 20th anniversary edition. It was just put out in its 40th anniversary edition. And I'm happy to tell you that I like this book as much today as I did then, because what I had done was to go through 100 years of psychoanalytic research. And in the course of doing that, locate the progress of the relationship. And so as we go through 100 years of psychotherapy, psychoanalytic investigation, there are 4 different watersheds of relational development that occur. And those will be the centerpiece of our 22 sessions together. We'll keep going back over these 4 again and again and again. And so it's important, like today, to begin getting the foundation of the 4, because over the time we're going to look at these 4 in very many different ways. But there's the 4 foundational ones. And so one of the things that helped me in my Listening Perspectives book was I began already as early as 1983 saying the scientific model championed by physics, chemistry, biology, and psychology, psychoanalysis, the scientific model had served its purpose, and post-Einstein, we were needing to think in new ways. And so when we think from a standpoint of developing perspectives that serve us to think, but are not true, how do we begin to do that? And that was the project I set out to make this book, Listening Perspectives. It's a complex book. It was just republished in the free website. I hope all of you have a pencil right there. I'm going to give you the name of this free website because it's very important that you all know it. It's called freepsychotherapiebooks.org, O-R-G, all one word, freepsychotherapiebooks.org, O-R-G. It's the website of the International Psychotherapy Association. And it was started by my publisher, Jason Aronson, after he retired. And he published more psychotherapy books than anyone ever. And so he knew all the writers, and he began asking writers like myself to volunteer our books to put them up on this free website so that people could download them. So you can go to this free website. There's probably about 150 books, classic books in psychotherapy that you can download free. And there's about 20 of my books there. And right now, my listening perspectives also just went up. And hopefully, before this class started, you received a copy of my relational psychotherapy handbook. It's a short handbook that was sent to you when you registered for this course. And that's a summary of the 50 years project with 400 therapists that we've been doing, and the more than 20 books that we published. They're summarized there. And that will be also the summary of our 22 sessions together. So I recommend to you to read this. Sammy, thank you very much for translating that into Chinese. So you can read it in Chinese or English or both. I sometimes find when my languages are Spanish, Italian, and French, and I sometimes find if I have a book side by side with the English and French, I learn a lot of French and some English in the process. So again, freepsychotherapiebooks.com, one word, .org, and download whatever you like from there. Now, in that book, Listening Perspectives, I start off with an epistemology that is startlingly different than the epistemology of science as we've known it. That is, I've already said that epistemology meaning how we know things, the study of knowledge. And the study of knowledge in the modern tradition was we would use the scientific model and then we would know truths. But in the postmodern era, we now are aware that we will never know the truths. They're much too complex. And so we're going to form perspectives. But the philosophers were well ahead of the psychologists. And Ludwig Wittgenstein, a British philosopher, he was fond of pointing out, he said, I'm going to read it. He pointed out that the form of our human beliefs and propositions is usually, this is the way things are. So when we look around us, we say, that's a banana. And so looks like a banana, tastes like a banana, must be a banana. And so we go through our whole world. And so in our psychological world, we also invent things. And so we say, there are such things as egos or ids or superegos. And so, but Wittgenstein has pointed out that that's a mistake. It's a mistake in our thinking that our idea about an id or an ego or a superego or any of other complex things, it's a lens or a frame through which we see things. But realities are much too complex to pin down to any particular definition. And so while theories are models of human nature, I'm reading here from my book, while theories are models of human nature, may provide us with a sense of security about what we think we know. When we actually encounter another human being, we need to realize that this person's internal world is entirely unique and totally unknown, and in many ways, forever unknown to us. So the personal world of a living, breathing, individual human being before us defies our thinking and defies our understanding. So we cannot possibly conceive of psychotherapy or psychology as being a way of deeply understanding anyone. So if the human mind is so complex that we can't possibly see or understand the human mind in general, or the human mind of Sally that sits across from me, if we now know that things are so complex we can't understand that way, so what are we going to be doing in psychotherapy? And my answer to that is our psychotherapy business is one of stirring the soup. That is, a person comes into us with a whole lot of concerns, beliefs, ideas, symptoms, history, and we listen and we ask and we make comments. But without the idea that we're ever going to fully understand that person or ourselves, what we're doing is stirring the soup, making things move around, raising questions that cause the person to think. So the purpose of our extensive psychological training is to enable us really to engage in a relationship in which long-standing relational habits that are unconscious can come into the room and can be studied by two people, so that these long buried unconscious patterns from the first year, second year, third year, fourth year of life, those relational templates that are unconscious, but that have been guiding a person's life in many different ways. In psychotherapy, we look for them to be enacted, that is lived out between the two of us, discovered, discussed, transformed, and expanded. That is, a lot of different things are going to happen, but it's a mistake if we think we know what we're doing. We don't, okay? That is, we go to psychology school to learn how to be present with people, to learn how to be in a relationship in which people can study themselves and in which we can help them study themselves and in the process, study ourselves. I don't have to tell you, you're all further along in your psychology training to where you know that each patient that you see transforms you in some way or another. Each person who comes into our psychotherapy practice leaves an impression on us. So we constantly grow and expand as a result of our work. I frequently tell audiences of psychotherapy that we are the most fortunate people on the planet, because every hour of every day, some entirely new human being comes in and we have a chance to get to know them. Every hour is different. Every experience is different. Every person stirs us in a different way. And so we continue to expand and expand and expand. And some days are very hard. Some patients are very hard. That's no question of that. But the expansion that we experience is something that is exhilarating. At this point in my practice, after many years, 50 years of practicing psychotherapy, at the end of the day, I am full of life. I'm exhilarated. I'm happy. People have contributed to me and I've contributed to them. Now, in my first 5 to 10 years, I was exhausted at the end of the day, okay? So that changes with time. And it changes as we begin to relax into just being relational rather than trying to change people into something that we don't know what we're doing. So we let people change us. Most people on the planet, as you know, don't like their work. Many times they don't have a human relationship during the course of the day. They may be working in factories, offices, or whatever, but they don't have the opportunity that we have hour after hour after hour to expand ourselves by coming into contact with another human mind. It's a gift that comes with our profession. The person who has expressed to me the simplest meaning of what it is we do in psychotherapy is the interpersonal psychoanalyst Edgar Levinson. Let me stand back just a minute. The relational approach has been developing in various places over time. And in a certain way, we can trace the importance of relationship back to Freud's first insights. And I'll give you those early insights about the relationship up in, I think, lecture 3 or 4. I go back and talk about Freud's first case. But the focus on relationship really began in the 1950s in what has been called the interpersonal school of psychoanalysis. The name that we remember is Harry Stack Sullivan. And the school of psychotherapy, psychoanalysis that he began has been known as the interpersonal school. And so the leader of that school by the 1970s was Edgar Levinson. And he has written a couple of incredible books in the early 70s. I never knew them until the mid 90s because we didn't have the internet. And he was in a different area, different geographical area. I didn't know who he was. But the person that's brought us together is Donnell Stern, and we'll be talking more about him. He's the current voice for interpersonal and relational therapy. And Edgar Levinson, so far as I know, is still alive. He's in his 90s, but he set up an algorithm to describe what happens in psychotherapy. Now, you know, an algorithm is a theory, an idea about something that we do that doesn't necessarily have any relationship to the content of it, but we do it anyway. The example often used of an algorithm was prior to our understanding of the Haemophilus mosquito that carried malaria. People who live near rivers knew not to live close to the river. They knew not to go out in the evening, and they knew to keep their dwellings closed during the night. They intuitively knew that something in the night air carried malaria. They didn't know what. And yet they knew what to do in order to avoid malaria. So an algorithm is a set of procedures that we do. We're not quite sure why, but we know we get a result. So here's Edgar Levinson's algorithm. He says there's three things. First, we set up the arrangements for psychotherapy. What days we're going to meet, what the fee is going to be, what we can and can't do, the rules, the procedures, the things that are going to characterize the formality of the meeting. That's the first thing that we do. Then second, we begin a detailed inquiry. And by that he means we just say, well, tell me about yourself. Oh, your mother did that? Well, tell me about that. And so we follow the patient in terms of inquiring about anything and everything that the patient mentions. And so we're going for the details. Now, while we're listening for all the details of this person's life, their beliefs, their religion, whatever they need to talk about, we look for relational themes that appear in different places. There's one theme that it might appear with mother. That same theme as occurred with the two recent girlfriends. And you all know that as people talk, we begin to notice relational themes. And so as we begin to talk about those themes with our client, then step number 3, you guessed it, we begin to look for those themes in our relationship with the client. That is, if those themes provide the foundation of this person's mind, and our minds are guided by relationships, then the way the person relates to us is going to be indicative, again, of what those themes are. So repeating, Levinson's algorithm is first, set up the procedures. Second, have a detailed inquiry that goes on for a long time. And we're looking to identify relational themes. And third, we look for the way those relational themes appear in the relationship with us. And as we go through these 10 lectures, I will needlessly say, be talking a lot about countertransference, the way the themes get involved in the relationship. And there's ever so many details of that we'll be looking at. Okay, let's see. All right. So the question would be how we can then begin, if we can't know the true nature of another human mind, and if forming preset models, ids, egos, and superegos, and so forth, ends up risking the biasing of what the experience is, what stance can we possibly take that's going to be open and allow people to begin? And here I would add that you all have you been studying psychology, you've been exposed to many Western ideas, many Western theories. And as you begin to do that, you begin to realize, well, there's something interesting there, but I don't think those fit the Chinese mind, for example. Oedipus is an interesting story, but that's 5,000 years old from ancient Greece. How do we think about Oedipus in China? You know, maybe we don't, maybe we do. So the question that your generation of psychologists is having to do is to say, the West has been studying psychology for 100 or so years. And so they've come up with a lot of ideas. They've made a lot of mistakes. A lot of the ideas that have come up don't make any sense. Many of them don't at all translate to China, but we can learn from some of the ideas they've generated. We can learn from some of the mistakes. We can learn from the tragedy of all the wars that have occurred among psychologists and psychoanalysts about what the truth is. And we can realize that we're not looking for truths. We're looking for ways to help us think and be relationally with our clients. And so the question there is, is your generation of Chinese therapists, how are you going to take those ideas in and develop psychology that is unique and special to the Chinese mind? And that's a challenge that faces each one of you. And I'm hoping that as you begin to do this, you're going to begin expanding your journals, expanding your conferences. You're going to be expanding your ideas, and you're going to be trying to take ideas from different places and develop them in the Chinese way. Now, the relational approach that we're going to be looking at, I'm hoping may be relatively culture-free, in the sense that I've already told you, human beings go through, as babies, in the womb, there's certain expectable developments of a baby. And then as the baby goes to mother's arms, there's certain expectable developments that are human, cross-cultural, if you will. Now, the way they get responded to is cultural. And then as the mother and the baby begin to form a bond and attachment, the process of that is something that all human babies do. And so the process of it is cross-cultural. The dimensions of it are cultural. And the same is true for levels 3 and levels 4, which we'll discuss. So hopefully, and maybe during these 22 sessions, the extent to which these models, these 4 different models, do have a cross-cultural appeal, you'll be able to tell me. And the extent to which they seem to be yet another story of Western mind, I'd like to know about that. So that'll be a project for you to think through and then tell me. We're going to have a series of question and answer sessions, and I'd like to hear your feedback about my ideas. So the only real assumption that we're making in the relational approach is that the human mind from conception continues to expand. Now, let me show you. All right, this is the chart that will form the foundation, the foundation of what we're going to be doing. Now, I'm going to go through this chart now, but we're going to look at this chart in a variety of different forms, but this is the backbone of it. And so while we are going to talk about different topics, we're going to be talking about them all with this format. Now, the chart starts at the bottom. And
sorry to interrupt, Larry.
Yes.
The chart is not shared in the share screen.
Oh, okay, that's not shared?
Yes.
Let's see. All right, I thought I had it on screen share. Let me see. Okay. Thank you.
No problem.
Okay. There we go. Let me see here. Share. All right. I had trouble getting these set up today. Okay.
Yes, we can see your screen now.
All right. There we go. How's that?
Good, thank you. It's great.
You got it? Okay. Sorry about that. All right.
No, that's okay.
So it's important for you to get this sort of emblazoned on your mind, because we're going to come back to it again and again and again, looking at it from different angles. So these are the 4 developmental listening perspectives that I outlined in my book in 1983, but they're taken from 100 years of psychoanalytic studies. As I went through those studies, I was looking for what are the watersheds of human relational development. And so the chart starts from the bottom. And do you see my cursor too? No. Maybe I'll try this. Okay, starts from the bottom. The Roman numeral 1, I'm calling it the organizing or the psychotic experience. And this experience is an experience that all babies have, plus or minus 4 months from birth. That is 4 months before birth and 4 months after birth. There is a certain kind of experience that babies are having. And in short, we could call it they're organizing their minds. And they're organizing their minds first in utero, according to the biology of mother's body. And then during that last 3 or 4 months, they're beginning to become much more aware of mother's movement, the people around mother, what mother is doing, what mother isn't doing. And so the child is organizing her mind according to what her experience is at that point. And then after she is born, she will then begin, baby begins to reach out with all of her senses, perhaps with a hand to mother's cheek, with her eyes, with her mouth on a nipple. Baby's reaching out in the environment to try to find what's there and to organize the neural pathways of the mind. And so when a baby is reaching, trying to find what evolution has promised, a warm body, a breast, a loving mother, sounds, movement, evolution has promised the baby all of that stimulation. But if the stimulation isn't there, the tendril that the baby has put out kind of withers and dies. On the other hand, if the baby is reaching, and suddenly out there's a smack, and the baby hurts, and the baby constricts and pulls back. So in these tendrils reaching out to organize the world, to make sense of what's around me, and all of those reaching tendrils, there's an array of faulty response from the environment that goes from withering to injury. But the bottom line is, the message in the neuronal system is never reach that way again. Never reach that way again. And so these channels become closed off. And the tragedy, of course, is the more channels that become closed off in those months before and after birth, the fewer channels are left to move on to the next level of development. And let's see. The next level then is going to be the number 2, the symbiotic level. This was the organizing level. The symbiotic level, or the bonding experience, or the attachment, And that's going to go between 4 and 24 months. And these dates are arbitrary because we're not looking at I really want to emphasize, we're not looking at a developmental path that each child takes. We're looking at relational possibilities that become more and more complex. And so there overlap. Different children do them in different ways, but they become ways for us to listen. So to what extent do we see in our patients that they are still organizing, or they are in a bonding experience? And what's the nature of the bonding experience? And how do people bring that bonding experience, the good ones and bad ones, good attachments and faulty attachments, how do they bring that to us for study? And then as the child or as the mind moves, but again, remember, these are perspectives with which to listen to people. But the third level of complexity, we call the self-other. The term comes from Heinz Kohut. He actually used the words self-object, but and he also used the word narcissistic. And this is a period of 3 years of age, again, more or less. And we know children, when they get into the narcissistic level, they come into a group of adults, maybe having some tea, and suddenly they begin performing, laughing and clapping and dancing, and everybody is clapping and saying, "Oh, how beautiful you are!" And you dance so well. Do that for us again. And so Kohut says that the way we develop a self is by being mirrored by other people. And so we need affirmation from other people during this third year of life for us to really feel strong about who we are, for us to be encouraged to develop skills and talents. And we do that by having people see us, recognize our skills, recognize us as people, that we're very special people with very special things to offer the world. And that's the period that goes around 36 months. Then as the child begins to get a firm sense of, I know who I am, the child begins to move into what is now considered the normal independent experience from 4 to 7 years of age, where the child is studying triangular relationships. Now, this is the period that Freud first pointed to and called it the Oedipus period. When Freud did that, he was in his own self-analysis, and he was to this period in his own life where he was beginning to study the triangles between himself, his mother, and his father, and other people in his family. But Freud was also a scholar of Greek and Roman history. And as a result of that scholarship, he said, wait a minute, this has been around for 5,000 years, this myth. And then in Greece, Sophocles turned it into a famous play. And then Shakespeare turned it into Hamlet. And so this theme of triangles has been essential in our culture. So he then named it the Oedipus complex. And that's wonderful for Western people who have that exposure. But I think Chinese people are going to have to say, all right, what are the images that help us understand the experience of a child? Here's the experience. Sammy, let's say you're my mother, and Zilly's my father. And I'm a little child, and I'm now full of myself. I know I'm a great person. And when I'm with my mother, I know what I can expect from her. And she knows what she can expect from me. My mother and I have a very special way of relating. It's solid, it's safe. I've learned it. We call it attachment. And until the door opens and Zilly walks through the door, and suddenly everything has changed, for good or for bad. Suddenly, your mind, Sammy, has to take him into consideration. My mind has to take him into consideration. And so we've got a three-way relationship that's there. And what's going on in that three-way relationship? And the other is true too. Zilly, I'm with you, my father, and I've learned to have a really good relationship with you, and we play our own father-son games, and that's really wonderful. And we're laughing and we're playing and we're doing fun things. And suddenly the door opens and mother walks through the door and our fun changes. Okay. That is, you must consider her, I must consider her. And so the three of us are now in a triangle in which all three people, in loving and hating, must consider each other. That's the essence of what Freud chose to call the Oedipus, and which Chinese are going to call something else. Years ago, I read The Dream of the Red Chamber, and I thought, what a rich set of stories about three-way relationships. And so right now I'm rereading it. I'm about halfway through, and all the way through, there are rich sets of three-way relationships. So I'm thinking somewhere in Chinese religion and art, you're going to find some really good images to try to capture the essence of I call them contingent relationships. That my relationship with my mother is contingent upon my father. My relationship with my father is contingent on my mother. And the worst thing about the Oedipus complex is when mother and father go in the bedroom door and lock it. And Freud called that castration. Injury. That is, you two have a life that I am shut out of, and it hurts. And so we don't have to think of castration literally, but that was the way the myth came from. And so the question for Chinese psychology is to be able to say, when the other side of the triangle, mother and father, or whoever the other two are, when those other two get together and shut me out, what is my experience of loneliness and pain and injury? So, so those are going to be the four levels. We're going to come back to them again and again and again in different contexts. So let me just repeat the organizing experience, I'm going to call it. The symbiotic experience, which is the origin of all the borderline and character disorders. The self-other or the narcissistic disorders. And the normal neurotic, the independent experience, when there are three independent selves interacting with each other. Up until that time, we've had the child dependent upon parental support. Here, the child is acting on her own. So let me stop that share. Okay. I'm watching our time. I want to have time for questions. Let's see. Okay, I'm going to introduce one other chart to you. And it's an elaboration of the chart you just saw. And we're not going to do much with it today, except just look at it. But it'll be an introduction to, did that come up? No. Let me try again. Screen share. All right. There we go. Now we'll do it. Nope. We're not going to see it today. Let's see. No, there it is. All right. You can see it's a variation on the chart. In the red, I've got the four organizing experiences, which provide us a listening perspective to certain kinds of experience. So now, if a person has either gotten stuck in one of these levels, or parts of us got stuck in those levels, we're going to see that we're going to be listening according to a certain kind of experience. Said differently, we all lived in a womb once. We all lived in mother's arms. We all learned how to bond and attach ourselves to mother and others. We all learned to be independent, and we all learned to live in triangles. But at each one of those developmental stages, there were relationship problems for all of us. There's no such thing as the perfect functional family. There's no such thing as perfectly normal development. We all have problems at every one of these levels. And this is the reason why we spend our time in our own psychotherapy, because we want to know what are the developmental levels in which relational problems existed for us, and we'll be looking for those themes. So here again are the four there. But now notice I've added some fears that come up, and I'm just going to state them now. We'll come back and look at them in detail later. But the first fear of an infant is the fear that our needs will not be met. And I already went in that. We will wither and die. But if we've learned to withdraw our connections, then the fear may be to be afraid of making connections. Then by the time we move up into the bonding experience, the first one is the fear of making attachments because we don't know what's going to happen. And then we have the fear of asserting ourselves towards independence. And then as we begin to get a self, the fear is that we won't be seen, we won't be recognized. And then the Oedipus triangle is here, the fear of cooperating and competing in love and hate. And then by the time teenage years are there, we find that we begin to fear being fully alive. By that I mean, by the time we're up in our teenage years and then in life beyond, there's so many cultural things around us that tell us who we are, what we can do appropriately, what we cannot do appropriately, that we are hemmed in by all sorts of rules and guidelines that limit our sense of being alive. So one of the things that we work on in our own therapy is trying to discover and put words to and bring to consciousness what some of those fears of being fully alive are. So we will come back to this particular chart later. Okay, let me see. All right, so then I'm going to read a little bit from one of my books here. Let me go back to that. The relational adventure of psychotherapy, then, is one of coming to re-experience in the psychotherapy relationship these habits and relational modes and how they operate beneath awareness in the here and now of life and psychotherapy, so that our relational habits and our relational modes must be lived and enacted, lived in a relationship, and brought into a mutually engaged consciousness. Now, in the 22 sessions, we're going to talk about how we're going to do that. How are we going to allow ourselves to be relationally present so that our patients have an opportunity to come forth and show us who they are? So our questions are then, how can I be of some use to people? What's going on here anyway? Where's our relationship taking us? And what do we do about all of this? And we need to have those questions constantly before us. And the answer to all those questions is simply pay close attention to yourself and involve yourself with your patient. The word consciousness comes from two Greek words, meaning knowing together. And so the unconscious habits from early childhood, as they begin to become enacted and talked about in the psychotherapy relationship, give us the origins of consciousness. Two of us come to know things together. And I don't have to tell you that have already begun doing psychotherapy, how many things we learn about ourselves with each patient. No. Okay, I want to state that I'm just about here, finished here. I want to entertain questions. But let me state that negatively. We are not looking in relational approach. We're not looking for any diagnosis, okay? We're not looking for any developmental categories or developmental steps. We're not looking for developmental models. We're not looking for any character structures. We're not looking really for any kind of content. The content can be anything, or processes or mechanisms but rather what we are looking for is personal expressions of life, relational experiences, and revelations as to how those experiences are alive and well in our present relationships, including the therapy relationship. And so, how are the relational listening perspectives best formulated? And so I'll show you the last chart. Remember the two you've seen. There's the basic one, then I added fears to it. Get ready. I'm gonna add, oops. That's the wrong thing. I'm not going to be able to give it to you. I lost it in the middle of here somewhere. It's a complex version of it that we'll be working with. It goes through in each of these four levels: transference, countertransference, ways of listening, ways of responding, and at each one of these levels. And that's going to be the essence of our 22 sessions in that regard. So let's see, I've got screen share on. Oh, okay, but here's the chart. No, it's not.
深深能请老师把它最大化吗？
Okay.
So Larry, could you please maximize the content?
All right.
Yeah.
Let's see if we can do it. Okay. We'll be looking at this chart repeatedly. Now, you can see here's the four levels: our first, second, third, and fourth. And so what's the developmental thrust? That is, what's going on developmentally at each one of these relational levels? And then what's going to be developing in the transference at each one of these levels? And then what's likely to be developing in the relationship in the countertransference in these developmental levels? And here's the rest of the chart. Again, our four pieces, but we're going to be looking not at transference and countertransference, but at resistance. How does resistance work in terms of preventing material from each of these levels to arrive? And what's the listening mode? That is, if we're just present and relating, how do we just allow ourselves to be relationally present, and what are we listening for at each one of these levels? And then finally, what are we likely to do as a therapeutic intervention? And it's going to be different at each one of these levels. And why? Because we talk differently to an infant than we do to a toddler, then we do a child experiencing her wonderful self, and then we do a child in a triangle. So we, at all of these different things are different at different levels. So again, these charts will be unpacked, but what I wanted to do tonight was to give you just a bit of a taste of where we're going and the complexity to which our relational understandings are going to go. And the important part of this is going to be, in the 22 sessions, how you can take this in and make it useful to you in whatever way you do psychotherapy. Okay, let's see. Well, Sammy, I think I've said what I wanted to say. Can I turn it over to you?
Yeah, for sure. 那个知丽老师结束了他今天的这个主题的演讲，然后呢，我们剩下有15分钟的这个 Q&A 时间。
好的 ，OK， 那大家聊聊吧，啊。
All right.
Yeah.
Hey, Laurie, thank you for sharing this. It's very interesting perspective. I was thinking about what you will introduce your idea to the patient who comes to you, like, oh, I'm in pain, I stuck here, and how you would use this theory to give some
Okay.
introduction about the work?
Well, excellent question. Because patients come in with all sorts of complaints. You know, pain is one example. My husband is another example. You know, there's problems. My child is another example. My mother is another example. So people come in with their whole life full of problems. Now, our question as psychotherapists is always, how do we sort through all of these things and find down to the basic pattern of their relationships? So we're caught with, on the one hand, knowing that my headache in and of itself is not what's going on. My husband is not the problem. My child is not the problem. But in our own minds, we're thinking, what is the problem this person is bringing to us? And the problem is going to be unconscious, and it's going to be relational. And so it's going to take us a while to begin to have ideas about that. So for the time being, all we can do is to say, oh, do you have these headaches often? Tell me about the pain. What does your doctor say? You know, the usual things we do. But what we're trying to do is we're trying to expand the person's awareness of the pain and what kind of days the pain is worse on and why the pain is worse, why I can't go to sleep the night after my husband and I had a fight, okay? Or why this has gone on ever since my child started school, you see? So we're busy listening. We are listening all the time for the relational dimension. The patient is telling us her problems. And so we have a complicated task, how to follow the content so as to be empathic, but how to listen at another level. We're listening for what relationships in your life have led up such that you are in so much pain. And the pain could be in your head, it could be in your stomach, it could be in your bowels, you know, anywhere, your jaw. And so with each person, we have the complex task of following their content for the purpose of empathy, but ignoring their content for the purpose of listening to their relational dimensions. And that's what we're going to go over in these 22 sessions, okay? And it's going to be particularly important when we do some of the supervision sessions, because whoever is going to be presenting the case is going to be presenting their interaction, you know, with the client and something about the client's history. And the rest of us are going to be looking at them and trying to see what relational themes we can see are coming from the past and how those themes may be starting to appear in the transference. And especially important, how those themes are embedded in the countertransference. That's a very important part of what we're going to be doing, is looking at the countertransference and how relational themes get projected into us to where we end up saying and doing things with one patient we would probably never do with another patient, you know? And so we're wondering, wait, well, what's going on? Something's going on here. I'm engaging with this particular patient in a way that I don't ordinarily do. What's that about? And so we'll be looking at the countertransference. So let's see. Okay, I'm needing to learn your names. Tell me your English name, not your Chinese name. What is your name? The one that asked the question?
Yeah, my name is in Chinese Wang Xiubing. You can call me Summer.
I can call you what?
Summer.
Summer. Okay. All right. Who's next? Summer, let me ask you. Did I answer your question okay? So the easy answer is, it's very hard to follow any of these things and to figure out what somebody's pain is about. The more difficult answer is, we're looking for how their whole life pattern of relationships have produced that pain.
Mhm.
So we're listening on two different levels. Celia, are you keeping track of the questions? Who's next?
Thank
Go ahead.
you for sharing it with us about this knowledge and your study. And I quite agree with the idea that we are not looking for diagnosis or something like that. We are looking for relationship. What's more, I also feel that it is in fact what our patients are looking for. No one come to us for some justice, what problem you have, but we look for some relationship. Here I have a question that is, in this relational approach, you pay special attention to listening. I wonder why listening? Why not observation, perspective?
Okay, very good question. I use listening in the broadest possible sense. That we listen with our bodies, with our sense, with our ears, with our hearts. So listening in the broadest possible sense. Does that help? Yes, because many times our listening happens in our gut. We suddenly have a gut feeling and we think, wait, something's going on here. And at that point, we begin to look at the relationship to say, how did that piece of interaction enter my intestine? You know. So tell me your English name again.
My English name is Sarah.
Sarah.
Yeah.
Okay. All
By
right.
the way,
Sarah, did I answer your question? No.
but may I ask you another question, further question?
Okay.
Your listening is not only listening, but also about including some other parts of something like observation.
Let's. Sarah, can you get slightly closer to your microphone?
I mean, you mentioned listening perspective, but it is not only listen by ears, but also listen by the whole body.
Yes. Yes, absolutely. Right. Yeah. When I was forming these, I was trying to, I could see there were these 4 different levels of relational development. And I was trying to figure out, and I didn't want to use them as levels of development because that's the old modern way of thinking, but rather I wanted to say, these are things that we have in our head. How I'm going to listen when I see somebody relating to me in a certain way. And we'll get clear of that through as we go through cases. Who's next?
Yeah, Larry, it's so great to join your class again.
Yes.
I was just I just have this question in my mind a moment ago.
Okay.
And I, like review the chart of the 4 levels of the listening and transference and countertransference and the interventions.
Right.
I'm wondering, when a patient is talking about all of the difficulties in his or her life and all of the difficulties in his or her relationships, maybe, or usually I could feel I can experience quite complicated feelings.
Yes,
so,
yes.
Which includes all kinds of transferences and countertransferences.
Absolutely.
So I'm wondering, how do, a simple question is like, which one goes first? Sometimes I feel like there are so many difficulties in this patient's life. So
yes,
which symptoms, which difficulties we would approach or try to connect with? Yeah.
Right. And so the answer is nobody knows. That is we're given very complex material, and but one of the reasons why the relational approach seems important is because when you're seeing and feeling all of those things, it's going to be important. What's important to you at that moment is what's going to grab you. This morning, I was working with a patient of mine, a 22-year-old girl who's very depressed and suicidal. And we worked on a set of dimensions for about a year and a half. Right in the middle of the session, she's talking about something, and I suddenly think, oh. And so I said, a light bulb just went on in my head. And she's looking at me funny like. And I said, can you let me just fumble around and talk about this a little bit and see where we can get anywhere? So since it had just occurred to me, it was not well formed. It wasn't brilliant. But it was murky. But she's worked with me long enough to where she's used to me being murky. And so I told her what I was thinking, and she was following it. And then she started asking questions about it. But you see, it was like somewhere this new idea hit me, and I said, what about that? And it generated more ideas in her. So was my idea right or wrong? It doesn't matter. I had it. I had the courage to ask her the question, and she began to develop more ideas. That's the important point. And so when we're working relationally, we learn to trust the countertransference. We learn to trust that we're human beings involved in a real relationship. And when we're in any real relationship, we try to be honest, immediately present. We try to let our emotions be a part of the relationship. So in psychotherapy, we have to be willing to do the same. Now, when we don't know patients so well, we're not as brave, we take our time. But when we get to where we have a strong relationship going, we can say almost anything, but the purpose is to get things moving. The way I said it earlier is stir the soup, so she'll be thinking about it before Monday. And on Monday, she'll come back and she'll say, that stupid thing you told me on Friday, I would like to add a few things to it, And so it goes on. All right. Did that address your question? I can't say answer it because there's no answer.
Yeah, that's definitely.
Okay.
That's the answer. Thank you.
All right. So you're left. Tell me your name. The other one that hasn't spoken yet. Yes.
Yeah. So I here is Lily Zhang, my name.
Oh,
and
okay.
I found now there is no specific question in my mind, but
okay.
I have some feelings to share. So
let's hear it.
Yeah. So I feel this is really a very rich lesson, and I also I enjoy the listening to you, and I'm very interested in the topics you will share with us in the future.
Okay.
And also I'm interested in the way you related to us.
Oh, you like that?
I think
Good.
that's very interesting.
I had fun. I saw you all were all engaged. It really helped me having your faces on the screen. And those of you who will be watching this as a video, I hope that I reached through the camera enough to where you felt my presence there as well. And so that you could see how a relational approach might add something to what you're already doing. And so we'll spend our 22 sessions together, hoping to enrich all of our lives, and all of you that are watching on video, that you'll be there too. And my email, I'll give you my email if you'd like to respond to anything. My email is lhedges7, no capital letters, lhedges7 @gmail.com. So if any of you here on the screen have questions, or if some of you watching this elsewhere, and you'd like to have a question or make some contact, lhedges7, no capital letters, zilli@gmail.com, and I'll see if I can answer your questions on it. Zilli, do you have any way to conclude for us? What are your last thoughts?
然后最后你有没有什么想法呢？来为我们今天的课做一个总结。
没有想法，我们时间到了，我们就下次见吧。谢谢所有的老师
Yeah,
啊。
like Julie really appreciates such a great lecture today, and now we are coming to the end of our class, and he appreciates all the effort, and thanks to everyone.
And thanks, Sammy, to you for setting all this up so nicely and helping us translate. All right.
No problem. Thank you.
Good night.
Thank you, Larry.
Good morning.
Ciao.
Have a nice day. All right.
You too. Bye.
All right. Bye.
Thank you.